right, everyone, let's get started. Thank you very much for joining. Hello, and a very warm welcome for taking some time out of your day to attend our webinar here. This webinar today is the next installment of our MVNO Academy series that PortaOne has done. This is now, I believe, the third or the fourth installment of our MVNO Academy webinar series. And if you're interested in all the other ones that we do have, please head over to our YouTube page afterwards and you can take a look. We have a playlist there and you'll find it surely, and hopefully help you in your journey to become MVNO or to improve your business operations, which is the goal of this webinar series. So on today's installment, I'm very, very happy to welcome Mr. Javier Pinzon. Javier and I actually met a long time ago when I just had joined PortaOne in 2006. And then I think, Javier, we had a training for you in Florida in 2007, I believe, was it?
Correct. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so very happy to have you here, and I thank you very much for taking your time. And so today's topic, we want to talk a little bit about MVNO pitfalls, traps, and tricks. And we invited Javier because he's actually been there. So he's gone through this journey and he has kindly offered to share his experience and hopefully help you in yours as well. So let's take a quick look here at the agenda. We're going to do a very brief look at virtual communications and PortaOne and the journey virtual communications took over the last 15 years or so. And then Javier has offered to share, as I mentioned, his experience to help you maybe recognize some of the tricks and traps in the fine print of an MNO agreement and what strategies maybe you can employ to safeguard your own long-term interests. And just to kind of give you maybe a little bit of an idea how we're having or why we're having this and why it's important to have this conversation is on the previous installments of our webinar, we spoke a little bit about the importance of defining your success, of what you want to achieve with the MVNO or with the mobile business, how you identify a niche in a segment. But we also spoke about the importance of your MNO agreement because it essentially defines the parameters of what you can and cannot do in your business. So today we're going to have a dedicated session just on the MNO agreement. And then, so at the very end, we'll also have a chance, obviously, to ask your questions to Javier or myself, but most likely, I believe it'll be to Javier, some clarifications maybe. Feel free to ask those questions, as I mentioned, throughout, and we'll get to them at the very end. Before we get underway, as we sometimes do on our webinars, we'd like to just have a quick understanding or maybe a quick check here and basically check with you, well, where are you in the MVNO development process? So you should have a poll pop up. If you don't mind answering that, are you just about thinking opening an MVNO? Are you in the process of signing a contract already? Or maybe your contract is already signed and you're about to launch? Or maybe it's something a little different and you're currently operating, you're trying to or correct course. So if you could give us a quick sort of show of hands. I see a few answers here coming in. Thank you very much. And Javier, just to kind of get you, we'll give folks another few seconds here to answer. We do seem to have a majority in the first stage, so thinking about opening an MVNO, which is quite interesting, and I think this topic is perfect for them. So So I'm going to end the poll and share the results here so that you guys participating can also see. So we have 85%, a clear majority of either thinking about or in the process of signing, the remaining 15%. Thank you very much for answering that question. All right.
It's actually great because you're going to take a big advantage of what we're going to talk if we are in those stages. So that's great news.
Excellent. Very good. So Javier, just as a way of introduction, I know there's a lot of details here on the slide, but maybe looking at your extensive experience, what do you feel has prepared you the best for succeeding in the mobile business?
Well, basically, I think it's a personal and technical combination. I've always been super interested since I was a child on how technology helps people, being people the most important part of it, even more than technology. So I think the edge we have applied in different businesses, and this is my third or fourth business, is basically that: put a lot of empathy and try to do really something that changes the user's experience or the user's life. And I think that's what prepares us the best. I've been in different technologies, but it's the common ground in all of them.
Interesting. Yeah, very good. And I mean, this was sort of also my feeling when we had the training for you in 2007, right? There was a lot of things that you were aiming to do with voice over IP and some of these communication businesses, and it seems it's almost a natural progression from a lot of folks are starting out in sort of more the fixed communications and then move towards the mobile communications.
It's like a regular evolution, because for us we were communicating people with whatever was the technology at the time, trying to beat long distance, and the technology was voice over IP and virtual numbers. But then people got mobile, and we needed to evolve to. Our objective was not the technology. Our objective was always bring families together and bring conversations longer, easier, more thoughtful and more profound, instead of the typical long distance conversation of everybody is okay, the cat, it's okay, goodbye, to a very long conversation, more into the heart of two people sharing important stuff together, even when they were apart. So for us, mobile was just one more step in the same direction.
Yeah. And did you feel, maybe as a last question before we move on, did you feel that was something lacking in the MNO market in Colombia at the time, or that you felt like you could do it differently or better in some ways?
Well, yes, I think this is the natural evolution of business. There was a lot of the feeling at that time was that there was not a lot of fairness in some of the rate structures and the way things were done and the way people were treated. So our MVNO was actually based on the premise of fair and trying to give people a very transparent way to use their money and to keep it and to use it. That's a challenge in terms of profits, but it was our niche. Was those people who really valued to be treated fairly. So we introduced, back then was a new thing, but we were the first MVNO to offer very competitive long distance international rates, and not these super high rates that the common carriers, the legacy carriers were having for international calling. But we're talking about 10 years ago, so it's a different world. It was a different world.
For sure. Thanks a lot. Well, let's see how we can dive into these in a little bit more detail. So moving on here, in terms of the do and don'ts, can you explain each of these points in a little bit more detail? Maybe starting with exclusivity, what you mean by it?
Sure, and I will share really quickly our story. So we purchased this MVNO in 2015, and we found the contract was exclusive, so we could not even go into the door of another operator without violating our contract. But the problem was we were exclusive, and if we wanted to change, we could not. The prices were negotiated on a common ground basis, but it was like a little bit of a lion negotiating the prices with a zebra, and we were the zebra. So it was a very tough environment because we had exclusivity. And even if you don't, we still have SIM cards. So if you want to move to a different operator and you have all of your SIM cards with one big carrier, then you have to switch all your customers to a different SIM card, which logistically will just break you. So it's very common to be exclusive by clause or by market conditions. And that's a very important consideration when you are dealing with your contract and the way you approach the dynamics of the contract. So exclusivity is almost a given in MVNOs and MNOs. We helped introduce laws in the country to manage wholesale, to try to balance that out, and we were successful. But exclusivity is a big deal. It's a big deal in your contract.
Okay. And then it's, in terms of pricing dynamics, what are you referring to here?
You can have different types of pricing in your contract. It's one of the most critical situations, and it all depends on what is your approach with your MNO, with your carrier. And this is the biggest learning I got from this experience. And we thought that the carrier saw us as a big customer and a partner, and we negotiated all based on that. And not all carriers are like that. Some carriers may see you as a milking cow because you have money to spend and you're attempting this new business model, or at least it was kind of new then. So it's very important that your pricing it's set in a way that you can be dynamic as the market. You know how market dynamics are in telecommunications. Prices always fall. It's very hard to find a price that increases, and quantities are increased and prices are reduced. So it's very important to understand how to negotiate your prices with the carrier. It could be in good faith if you have a carrier that likes you, sees you as a partner, sees you as a great customer. Or if that's not the case, you need to have a very good formula in the contract to assure that you have a price that goes with them. So a year ago or a year before you're analyzing today, your price per minute and voice, just to give an example, could be 10 cents. I'm just gonna make easy numbers.
Of course.
In a year, it could be 8, the average price in the market. And 1 year later, it might be 6. So if you don't have the right pricing and the right formulas to calculate price, in 2 years, you might be still paying 6 to the carrier, and the market is at 6. So you have no margin, and it happens. So it's very important to set a good structure of negotiating prices. Very important with data, which not only decreases in per kilobyte cost, but increases the demand from users, but also in SMS and voice. Less important, but critical too. So the formula you calculate your prices on an ongoing basis is going to determine pretty much the success of your MVNO.
Interesting. Yeah, it's I now would imagine that these negotiations, I'm sure, go back and forth, and there's quite a bit of MNOs trying to exert their market power, I believe, and trying to get you to agree. Did you ever feel like there's sort of the take it or leave it approach, or was there indeed room for negotiation?
Well, half and half, and I'll give you an example. We had, when we got there, the contract said that we had unlimited bandwidth on a pipe, on a channel for 3G. The technology back then was important, 3G. So we had a very good deal on 3G, but 4G was coming, and we didn't have an agreement on 4G technology. And the carrier said, "I'll charge per kilobyte."
I see.
So we couldn't continue offering unlimited to any type of service and manage the bandwidth, we had to move to per kilobyte. And that actually costed us 75% of the business, that issue of not being able to negotiate the kilobyte as a capacity instead of per use. So it's very critical. And you will see MVNOs that will start one way, but their contract doesn't allow for, 5G, and they have LTE and conditions change. So it's a pretty dynamic thing, and it's a tough part. It's the most critical part of your contract.
I guess I imagine it would be tough to try to bake into the contract some sort of forward-looking technologies, because I guess on the MNO side they also don't know exactly which technologies might come.
We did. I mean, we did something in the country I was working on in Colombia and South America. There was no legislation for wholesale, so there was no regulation. Carriers could sell to whatever they agreed with MVNOs. So we took the effort to go to Spain, who had a pretty mature MVNO space. We were able to talk to the CEO and make friends with the CEO of an MVNO, very successful MVNO in Spain. And he helped us understand the regulation in Spain. So we copied that model, went back to Colombia, and began educating our regulator and telling them, hey, this could be really good for the market. It took a year. It was very quick, but it took us a year to do a lot of work and pretty much do all the work possible for them. And we came with formulas inherited from Spain and Germany. And the formula was pretty simple, but I'll give you some caveats later. The formula was whatever that carrier is reporting to the authorities as their total volume. I'll continue with the minutes because it's a simple math. So if they sold last month 100 million minutes, and it's just a number, and they charge, $10 million to the market in different mixes, prepaid, postpaid, whatever, it means that the average was 10 cents. So that, even if the technology changes, it gives you an average per service, and then you negotiate a discount on the 10 cents. So if next year, that is 200 million in the same 10 million, as it happens in telecommunication, then your new average is 5 cents. So your price is 5 cents minus a discount. So this was a proven formula in Europe. And then we learned that there were tricks to go around that, and I'll share those later. But yes, you can put formulas that will help you a little bit of foresee, not necessarily the future, but future ways of calculating.
Right. Interesting. Thank you. What about the fraudulent traffic management? Is it that there was pre-existing fraud, but that you weren't aware of, but that somehow the MNO wasn't quite forthcoming in explaining that, or what do you mean by fraudulent traffic?
No, well, we discovered the very hard way. Experience is a very good teacher. It's not inexpensive, but it's a very good teacher. When we had unlimited negotiation of 3G with the carrier, we were having fraud. We just didn't notice. Our channel will fill faster, but it was not too bad that we couldn't handle it. But when we start paying 4G by kilobyte, then the fraud became a big deal, $200,000 a month. And the fraud was an amazing thing. I mean, in my home country, when I used to live there, we're very creative. Colombians are very creative, as many parts of the world. But we are creative. And we discovered a chain of small shops everywhere in the country that will modify your phone. It was Android, most of the phones. They modified your phone to become its own DNS server, which means they masked YouTube traffic labeled as DNS, and then they converted back on their side. So we were having DNS traffic, which is unlimited because it's supposed to be very small, and it became huge. The problem was that DNS service was provided by the carrier in their infrastructure, but charged to us. So very quickly, as we moved to 4G, we began seeing a huge spike in traffic. And it was a combination of a bad negotiation on our side. We did not foresee that fraud will be for sure thing. It's human nature. People will try to get more for less. If you interview them in the street, they're just wild. They figure out a way YouTube for free. They don't even think they're doing something so bad as creating this big problem. And the other problem we had is in our contract, there is a gentleman's agreement in many parts of the telco industry that if you get hit with fraud, your provider will try not to profit from your fraud. They will give you a discount or give you some terms, so at least they don't profit from your fraud. In our contract, that was not the case, and we discovered that our MNO was not our friend. Our MNO profited from the fraud. Actually, they benefited from the fraud. Not that they wanted to happen.
Yeah. Do you think they were aware of what was happening with the?
We made them aware. We made them aware 1 year before that we begin seeing these, and they couldn't control it.
Interesting.
So they didn't fix it. That they continued profiting from it. It was a very, very, very big deal, and fraud will happen.
And is that sort of what you're referring to under the cash flow management as well? That obviously, it's important to keep a tight control over, what happens in your network and with your customers, because it directly impacts your cash flow. Or were you referring to something else here?
No, it's something different. I mean, obviously this impacts cash flow as pricing does, but your cash flow management is very important. Especially if you are into the prepaid world, depends on the regulation in your country. In our country back then, you could take advantage, it was called like that, a way to take advantage of the money that was in the account for more than 60 days without any top-ups. So that money, like in gift cards, gift card has a different regulation in each country, but that was money that was your profit. There's no money for the customer anymore if they let 60 days without prepaid recharge or top up.
Yeah.
So the cash flow management in your business is going to be the most critical control besides your price agreement and controlling your fraud, because you need to make sure, you can be a cash machine if you are selling prepaid and paying postpaid to your carrier, because you keep that money, 45 days or 60 days in the best case scenario. But be very careful about cash flow. It's the most critical thing on the MVNO in terms of the management.
Yeah, interesting. So now that we sort of, and I very much appreciate you sharing these tricks and traps that maybe, we were chatting just briefly beforehand, were sometimes quite painful for you to do on your own, to have these experiences, but in some ways, maybe you got through it to the other end and hopefully for the better. But what now that we've sort of identified maybe these tricks and traps, what were some of the strategies that you used that maybe folks attending here can also use to safeguard against these sort of things?
So I kind of touched some of them, but the most important part is take a look at your regulation in country. Each country is different. Look at the regulation for wholesale markets. If you do not have one, make sure to pick your carrier and make sure that the carrier sees you as a great business partner. We were the carriers at that time, the biggest customer of that carrier, but we were not seen like that. We were seen as kind of a competitor. So be very careful of analyzing how the carrier sees you. So there's other carriers in the country that saw their MVNO as the best customer, and they treated them as the best customer and a partner. So this is more like psychology, but make sure you understand that if you have a regulation, then you need to be very aware of the probably 2 or 3 tricks on the regulation. And one of them is how prices are calculated. And let me go real deep into one little thing.
Please do.
We discovered that in Colombia happened, and I can only speak for one situation. I don't know the whole market, but the MNO was reporting 100 million minutes, let's say, charging $10 million. So an average of 10 cents a minute, and over that, we got 35% discount I think that was our margin. But we later on discovered that they accounted for the 100 million minutes without including promotions, marketing, giveaways, and their own fraud. And the reality is that it was not 100 million, it was closer to 200 million. So the average price should have been 5 cents, and we ended up paying 6.5. So the reality at some point before we went in is that in many moments we were paying more than the average they were selling for, which makes you non-competitive.
Right.
So you really, we are all into this world, and some of us are technical, some of us are different aspects. You really need to become a bit of a regulation person and understanding very well the regulation, because your business is going to survive or not based on your understanding on the regulation and the pricing dynamics, or your contract.
I suppose how it's being enforced by the regulator too. It's great to have regulation if the enforcement isn't up to par.
But you can help if you really understand. We were informing the regulator that in this report the carrier was showing 100 million, and in this report the carrier was showing, because it paid different taxes, it was reporting something different. So there was a mismatch, and the regulator analyzed it. So it's not that you are doing anything against the carrier, we're just making sure that the formula is being read correctly. So you can do a lot. You can participate in the market, and actually even make you the best friends. It will make sure that they understand that you are here for serious, and you are just taking your rights and making the regulation be followed. So that's one thing. Same thing with the pricing dynamics. I think I covered that because it's even the regulation or the contract. So make sure that if your formula says you will give me a discount of 40% on your average price, you need to know the numbers, because one thing is to say the math, the other one is to see the actual 100 million versus 10 million, or 150 million versus 10 million, or whatever it is. So I think that's a strategy to safeguard the interest. Another thing that might be able to help you a lot is to discuss what happens if we get hacked or there's fraud. And at least if the MVNO is giving you the platform, well, they should cover any misuse of the platform. If it's your platform, they still will have a role. Like in our case, we have our platform, but they provided DNS, and we were attacked on DNS, not on our platform.
I see.
So that's a discussion.
I was curious about that, because obviously with fraud, you may not know exactly in what shape or form it will happen. Maybe you have the awareness to say, after this session, you're launching MVNO, you know fraud will happen, but you don't know in which form. So how would you safeguard against that, right?
Well, I guess after so many years of experience with data shaping, I think the fraud will happen mostly on data. And I think there's known strategies now. We're talking about 2016, so 8 years have passed.
Yeah.
There's a lot of well-known strategies still valid and still being used and abused. So the DNS attack is a very common one. So I think is just document yourself on the possibilities of fraud and have an open discussion with the carrier. They will probably know, and they're probably suffering from that. And you can come to an agreement in terms of how you handle fraud, who pays for it, who does not profit from it, and what are the rules and controls to close the gap when you are having an issue with some sort of fraud.
Right. I could see how a real-time platform like Porta Billing can obviously help to at least identify or keeping a close eye also on these sort of situations, just like almost a DPI for in your data network would do, to make sure that the traffic that goes through your network that you pay to the MNO
Correct.
is of the
I think from the technical standpoint, the DPI and real-time billing, like PortaOne will do, are the most important technical tools you have. Number one, you cannot anymore sell kilobytes on mobile. People are expecting free WhatsApp or this many videos or these many. They don't speak kilobytes.
Sure.
And so it's the DPI and the shaping is super critical, and the real-time control is critical. So I think that with fraud detection, which PortaOne has on the voice side, we've been using it for, I don't know, we're getting to 18 years now. It's critical because it detects patterns that are outside the regular consumption. That's the most critical part. Unfortunately, when we purchased this MVNO, they did not have PortaOne. And it was one of the key things that we suffer so much is trying to switch to have control. So it's very critical that your MVNO or MVNE platform is something either the carrier provides and takes the liability on for misuse, or you have a very good platform, hopefully is Porta Billing, and you have the data shaping controls, because that's where most fraud occurs.
Interesting. Very good. Thanks so much, Javier. And anyone that's attending, I see a couple questions are being asked. Very good. We're gonna get to them in just a few minutes here. So if you were attending here and you see the do's and don'ts, we do appreciate you taking the time here. So we prepared a small gift. Actually, we will have the recording, obviously, of this webinar available shortly. But we also prepared. Our marketing team worked very hard with you, Javier, to bring that into, I think, a very nice, catchy download for anyone that's participating. You see the link here on the screen. My colleague has also shared it in the chat, so you can click on it right away, which is basically summarizing Javier's and my talk here today, and his points, his advice for maybe how to go into some of these negotiations. And I think it's super important to have that sort of awareness. We know each country is different, so maybe Javier's experience with Colombia may not be 100% applicable to wherever you do business, but it's also quite similar. We've seen it, and that's, I feel grateful at PortaOne. We do business all around the world, and yes, there are unique things about certain countries and places, but in almost all circumstances, there are a lot of things that are the same, that are very similar. So that gives you the ability to maybe benefit from some of Javier's experiences that he, in some ways, painfully made over the last 10 years. So let's switch it up and see if we did get one question here already. Someone was wondering, Javier, how did you solve the problem with the DNS traffic?
Well, it was super hard because we have to restrict the amount of traffic on DNS, and that made customers very mad because they didn't understand they're cheating the system. They were sold in a little cell phone store in a place in Bogota, in this case, 10,000 pesos at that time, a $2 modification to their cell phone that will give them free YouTube, and they thought it was their right. So we actually have a big backlash when we put a limit on DNS traffic. DNS is very small, is what results the names of the websites you're trying to visit. So it's a very, very, very tiny small. When we restricted the amount of DNS you could have per day, we had a lot of customers who had no internet because they watched a video in the morning through their modified phone and then called to complain all day because they couldn't get to any website. It was very hard to explain them what was happening, and we could not let that open, and we cannot not control it. So I wouldn't say it was 100% solved, to be honest with you. I don't know if it's solved nowadays, but it was not solved back then.
Yeah, interesting. I would imagine that would be very tough with, especially if you do a business in some prepaid markets. I mean, we all have some experience in telecommunications, but the average consumer doesn't, and nor should they have, the experience that we have in telecommunications, having that sort of understanding if they feel, hey, I've always been getting it, why doesn't it work now? So I'm certain it would be very tough. There's a question here asking if you could elaborate a little bit more on the good and what's not so good about pricing models when negotiating with your MNO.
Yeah, I think the best pricing model, I mean, number one, there's different strategies in MVNOs. So you even have a niche market where you really are different. And I'm going to give you examples. You're a community. One of the best customers we've seen were a church. And they had their own community because they wanted to share information, and they were not so sensitive to price. But if you have no niche and your customers are extremely sensitive to any change in price, you're going to have a very hard life being an MVNO, unless you have a great contract. But the other good strategy in MVNOs is if you can bundle with other services. And without being unrespectful, and please give me some levers here. When you're part of a church, that's part of a service. I'm not saying it's a telecommunication service, but it's part of a community. So you're getting more than just the minutes or the kilobytes. So some people go into bundling TV shows or streaming at home, plus home phone, plus I don't know, some other services, plus MVNO. And the total, maybe the MVNO doesn't make much money for you, but the bundle makes money and makes a happy customer. So that can help too. The other MVNOs that work very well are bundled with a large store or a community of purchasing. So big, I don't know, Carrefour in France, if you give points every time you purchase in Carrefour, and you can use those points to get minutes or kilobytes, that's a good exchange, like airline miles kind of thing. So those bundles are very good. If you do not have those bundles, you really need to have a very good price. And my best advice for price is negotiate with your MNO that you're going to get a discount. It's a typical wholesale. I mean, if I sell milk and I want to wholesale your milk, the typical agreement will be, this is the price you sell your milk. You give me a 35 or a 40% discount. You're not going to do marketing. You're going to spend money there, manufacturer. Let me spend my money on that and give me a 40, hopefully more, % discount on your price. Key thing is how we calculate your average price. But if you can get your average price minus a discount, it's a dynamic pricing that will take you 5 years down the road.
Excellent. Thank you for taking a little more time to answer that. There's another question here that I think is quite interesting. What comes first? So the question is, where would a new player start? Negotiation with an MNO or looking for a license from the regulator? So what comes first, license or the
With agreement? My experience today, obviously it depends on the country and how hard it is to get the license. But definitely, in terms of strategy, I will not even ask for a license if I don't have a good partner with the MNO. If I don't get a good pricing structure and a long-term future vision, I wouldn't even spend the money on the license. That would be my point. Unless you're very strong and you're representing a very strong store chain, food store chain, some big brand, and you have kind of a balance. We saw one that was a TV media outlet that had a very strong presence on advertisement. So they had big part of the problem solved, and they will get a carrier agreement because they were strong enough. But if you're not super strong compared with the MNO, I think your best bet is to figure out you have a good contract and then go for the license. That would be, unless in your country it's super hard to get a license and you need to get started there. But I will go the other way around.
And I think that's what we've seen in some of our conversations that we're having with some of our customers. We do see, I think, picking up on that, Javier, in your recommendations here, we do see if you're sort of a, let's say, a greenfield MVNO or even a communications provider in a different field, but not providing communication services yet, oftentimes it seems a good strategy, what folks seem to be pursuing is trying to partner with a brand, right? With a big brand that's not in the communication market, like let's say a car or insurance company or a bank, and partner with those folks and create a tailored offering for their customers, because they would have the brand power, and then you can bring them into the MNO and hopefully negotiate a much better agreement for yourself.
That is correct. And that affects a lot the cash flow, Klaus, because the biggest cost you're going to have is going to be to the cost of acquire a new customer. And sometimes it can be 2, 3, 4 months of revenue to get one customer if you're doing it by yourself with advertisement and all of this. But if you partner with a brand that has the customers, your cost to acquire a customer might become half a month. So you go from 4 months to half a month. And that's a lot of cash. If you acquire 100,000 users and it costs you $40, then you need $4 million. But if you are partnered with a firm that has 100,000 customers, or you only have to spend $20, well, that's a very different thing.
Interesting. There's a question here from a context in Bangladesh. So, excuse maybe right from the start, both myself and Javier may not know as much about the Bangladesh context, but the question is, how do you convince MNOs to go into an agreement with you? So it seems in Bangladesh, regulations are now coming into the market. They've been working with a regulator, and finally they're working on the MVNO guidelines. So how do we start direction-wise? Is it wise to tie up with an existing MVNO globally and bring them into the country?
Well, that's a tough one. My guess is I will try to find the MNO, the carrier, that understands MVNOs.
Yeah.
I would not force my way, even if I am cousin with the president of the carrier and they don't understand MVNOs, or they don't want MVNOs, or they see you as competition, I wouldn't go with them. You really need an MNO that understands that they cover one space on the market and you can go in a niche and do actually a much better job than them.
Yeah.
So if they see you as a partner to quote unquote steal market from someone else and bring it to the carrier, that's the right partner. So I will really search into the partner who understands MVNOs the best.
I think also adding to that, from my perspective, it almost seems counterintuitive, maybe trying to bring in an outside MVNO, because oftentimes what we've seen, the MVNO business is quite specific in a lot of countries, and it would be, and I think my recommendation from what we've seen would be, have a vision, know your customers, know who they are, know exactly what you want to offer them. And I think that's oftentimes the best way of, and then try to engage some technology companies, just like PortaOne. Reach out to us. You can reach out to other folks, and more than enough, a lot of technology companies are trying to help out and offer their assistance with making some progress in this journey.
That's good advice.
Fantastic. Well, those are some very good questions. I appreciate everyone taking asking some of the questions. We still have a couple more minutes here before we close the session. So if you still have a question, please make sure to get it in. If you think of a question right after the session, what oftentimes happens, we close it and hey, there's a question. No problem at all. Please reach out to us at sales@porta.one. We can help you with those. We will also have the recording. So for those colleagues of yours that maybe weren't able to participate in today's live session, we'll have the recording sometime next week, I believe. Javier, I think there may be one more last minute question. I see. I was just going to close the session.
And I have a question. So I will
actually, in the mean, sure, please go ahead.
No, my question is, where were you in 2015? I wanted to have a little conversation like this before I went into the MVNO with my eyes closed, because all of this I discovered by experience. So that's why I'm so glad I can share a bit of our experience, because I feel that if I had that in 2015, our life would have been so much easier. Because we were so optimistic and we were only seeing the profit side, we were only seeing the beauty of the market, and we did not understand that there were some tough battles to fight in pricing, fraud, and cash flow, or regulation, if you want, instead of pricing. And I think it's a good thing to do a lot of planning. You guys are before operating. If you do your homework, your life will be so much easier. So that my question is, I wish I found you in this space in 2015.
So it does look like we got one more question here. I'm just gonna read it out here. So this is from a Nigeria context. There seem to be issues in Nigeria with SIM boxing and call masking, refilling, which eats deeply into the profits. How does an MVNO prepare itself, and how do those fraud risks get mitigated?
Well, I'll be honest with you. This is a type of fraud we didn't have back in Colombia. So I'm not going to be able to give you exact details on that. But I think talk to the MNO and see what they're doing. They're having the same problem, and they're implementing some tools to at least detect it. And we, in our time in Colombia, we cut ties with any customer that was abusing. So at least there was a way to stop the bleeding.
Yeah.
So we had a group of people running reports and detecting people who were abusing of the system, and calling them and telling them, I'm sorry, but your ID is locked and you cannot be our customer anymore, returning their balance so we don't have a problem with the law, etc. And saying, sorry, but we don't want you as a customer. A painful process, but talk to your MNO and try to figure out how they solve that, or talk to a technology company like PortaOne. They might have tools to detect that.
Yeah.
And in that way, you could prevent from completing calls or completing services from a customer where their profile of use seems fraudulent. So I think you can only have two sources: your carrier or your technology.
Yeah. Okay. Very
but
good.
It's a very good question.
There's one more question here that I think I can probably answer, which goes towards the setup integration costs, whether they're standard and what some fixed monthly costs might be. Maybe before you answer, Javier, from your perspective, from my end, and we got this question a couple weeks ago on our previous installment on the MVNO Academy as well, with Nordic eSIM, when we talked about the role of eSIMs in the mobile market. And both Rooney and I, we were reflecting to say, look, 10 years ago, and maybe Javier, you can reflect on that too. 10 years ago, the cost of launching an MVNO was most likely much, much higher than it is now, with cloud technologies and SaaS technologies around. So the cost of entry in terms of integration costs, startup costs, and fixed monthly costs are most likely lower than what they were 5-6 years ago. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, 100%. It was very expensive to try to launch back then, and you had to do some of the integration yourself. because not the tools were not as mature as they are now. I'm impressed with how mature the tools are now, and you can get one-stop shopping for a lot. Before, we had to integrate a lot, and that's a risk. You made a bad integration and you get fraud through that.
And it probably used to be a fixed integration where you had to have developer resources. I mean, nowadays, a lot of integrations that we do are with low-code, no-code tools, where it's more of a configuration as opposed to a fixed development that cannot easily be changed over time, which helps in those costs as well.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And I think everyone here, there's a few questions about specifics in terms of costs. The recommendation would definitely be from our perspective. Please reach out to us at sales@porta.one. We'll be happy. We're very transparent. We'll be happy to share what it takes on our end, what we offer, and what the costs might be on our end. And there's a couple questions again about POCs. So yeah, the best course of action in that case, reach out to us in sales. We can get the steps started. There's maybe one last question, I think, because this is the one I had also. We talked about exclusivity. So there's a question here, can you have an agreement with multiple MNOs at the same time? And I saw, Javier, you are actually an MVNA, an aggregator. So you have multiple agreements, or?
Well, yes, you can. And that was part of what we introduced with the regulation, that you could buy from different carriers. It's a bit of a pain because you have SIM cards with different carriers, so they're not interchangeable at this point in time. Yeah. But yes, you can, and it's actually a very healthy practice if you're growing, to have a little bit of a distribution of your risk, and that gives you inside view of two different carriers, and it gives you price comparison, service comparison, and multiple things if you have multiple carriers. So if you can do that, it's great. Maybe you need to start with one, but making sure you have the door open for a second one, because integrating, I'm not talking about the technical part, but the political part of the integration and the testing and all of this, it's a bit painful. And it's a non-technical job, but it's painful. But yes, it's ideal to have more than one agreement at a time.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. We're just coming up here to the hour. Javier, once again, thanks so much for joining me here today. This was super helpful, very informative. And I hope anyone attending felt the same. And yeah, looking forward for the next 15 years of doing business together.
Yeah. Well, actually, I have a quick note to the end, and the reason I'm here is I'm not associated or affiliated at all with PortaOne, different than being a customer for 16 years, 17, 18. I don't even remember anymore, but it's very key to have a partner that is looking on the long term. And obviously, I'm biased because I've been in the long term with PortaOne, but it's very critical to have a good partner. And if you guys work with PortaOne, we've been around. We had tough times at the beginning, but here's the proof. My dad used to say that it's not about not making mistakes, it's how you react to your mistakes. So I'm glad to be here and to share with you guys our experience, and to thank PortaOne for these years of service.
Great. All right. Well, thanks so much for participating, attending, everyone. All right.
Thank you for your participation. Great.